Okay, so we've jumped through a bunch of hoops just to get the Epic Games launcher and get Unreal Engine installed on our machines. And now we're ready to actually launch the engine and see what that's all about. Now on my screen, don't worry about this installed plugins right here. If I click on it, it just tells me that there's an update available for this particular plugin. Now, we'll talk more about this plugin later in the course when we're going to use PaperZD. I can simply update that plugin and get rid of that message. In fact, I can do that right now, but you don't have that message because you haven't installed the PaperZD plugin in your engine version. We'll do that later. Don't worry about that. But now I don't have a exclamation point there, so nothing to worry about there. But we're ready to launch the engine now, and what we can do is simply click on Launch. Now, how long it takes to load up, that's going to depend on your machine, how powerful it is, but just give it a few moments. And now we have the Unreal Project browser. Now, just like we had in our library and the Epic Games Launcher, there are a number of projects here for me. If you've never created any projects, you won't have any here. So there's nothing for it to show. But as you create projects, they'll start popping up here, and that just gives you an easy way to select those projects and open them up. But we're going to navigate away from the Recent Projects tab and go down to Games. Now, there are a number of other tabs because Unreal Engine is capable of handling not just games, but other things like architecture, automotive, simulation. It's quite an amazing engine. But we're focusing on games for this course, so we're going to click on Games. And now we have the opportunity to create a new project, and we can create a completely blank project, or we can choose from among these template projects, which, as I mentioned in the previous video, contain some assets and some code, and you can literally create projects starting from these starting points and build on them. And that's often what people do when prototyping or learning. So if you click on one of these and select them, we get a little thumbnail image along with the description for that template project. For example, the third-person project features a playable character where the camera is positioned behind and slightly above the character. So these give you examples for basic functionality. Now we're just going to create a blank project. This is going to be our very first Unreal Engine project, and as you can see, it's blank. Now, the thumbnail for you might be different. It may show something different because they change the blank project from time to time. In fact, this entire Unreal Project browser changes from time to time. Previous Unreal Engine versions had a browser that looked a little bit different, and later versions in the future may look different from this one. But the process is the same. You're just going to choose a template or choose blank. Now there are a couple of project defaults. You can choose Blueprint, you can choose C++, but this is a Blueprint course. We're only going to create Blueprint projects. Just FYI, you can always turn a Blueprint project into a C++ project, but we're focusing on Blueprint. Now for the target platform, you can choose desktop or mobile, but we're going to choose desktop, and you don't have to mess with quality preset. It's already set to maximum, but there's a checkbox here for starter content, and this will add some assets that we can use in our project. And these are things like basic pieces of geometry, basic effects from sounds to particles like fire. These allow a beginner to have something that they can work with while they're learning. So we're going to check that starter content checkbox. And this is also something that you can add to your project later. If you create a project and you forget to check that checkbox, starter content can be added later, and we'll go over that as well. Now, ray tracing is a technology that Unreal Engine is capable of. It's more taxing on your computer. You need a GPU or graphics card that can handle ray tracing. And I encourage you to go research what ray tracing is if you're interested in diving deeper into that, but we're going to leave that unchecked. I typically do. And finally, at the bottom, we have project location and project name. Now, I like to create a folder that I keep my projects in. That way I can easily find it on my computer. So I've created a UE5 projects folder. And notice this is not on my C drive. You can put your projects on your C drive if you like. I typically put them on a secondary hard drive so I don't fill up my C drive. My secondary hard drive has a lot more space. Now, depending on your machine specs, it may take longer to load from a secondary hard drive than the time it takes to load from the C drive. I personally don't notice much of a difference. And you can ask me about my machine specs in the Druid Mechanics Discord if you're interested. So I'm going to choose my UE5 projects folder, and we need to give our new project a name. Now, this first project that we're going to create is just for getting our feet wet in Unreal Engine. It's just for learning. So we're going to call this our Section 1 project. Now, feel free to name this something else if you want to call it something else. I'm going to call it Section 1. That's my project name. It's not too important what you call the project. If you're making a game, it doesn't have to be called your game's title by any means. This is just the name of our project. Whatever you call it, give it a name and make sure that you have blank selected. We're not going to touch these template projects, at least not just yet. So make sure that that is selected. Make sure that Blueprint is selected and not C++, and click on Create. And here we have our Unreal Engine project. We have now launched the engine, and this is what the engine editor looks like. And what you see here is something that will also change from engine version to engine version. Sometimes the UI changes its look slightly. Usually later versions look a little bit more sleek. The colors and shades might be a little different, but overall we have the same thing here. Now, what you see in this very large window, the most prominent window here, this is the viewport, and it's showing us a game level. And again, this game level may be different for you. Earlier versions of the engine didn't show what I see here. It was a different level. So even though we chose blank, it's not really blank. There's a few things in this level. It looks like a big terrain, right? And that's because that's what they chose to have their default blank level start at. So whatever you see here, don't worry, we're going to replace it with an even more blank level. Now down at the bottom left, there's a content drawer. And it may be harder for you to read on the screen, and for that reason, I'm going to change my display settings on my computer so that things are a little bit larger on my screen. Now, you don't have to do this. I'm doing this just to make it easier for you as you're watching this. Some people are watching on smaller screens or mobile devices. So we're going to change the scale of things here in Unreal Engine. I'm going to click on the very top on the gray area so that I undock my Unreal Engine editor window. It looks like there's this other window here that says Content Browser. That popped up automatically for me. I'm going to close that. And just on my Windows desktop, I'm going to go to my display settings for this screen, and I'm going to change the size of text, apps, and other items to 125. That's going to make things larger, easier to read, and it's going to make my Unreal Engine editor look a little bit different than yours now. The only thing is, things are scaled up a little bit larger so it's easier for you to read. Now I can click on that content drawer here, which has a pop-up that says opens a temporary content browser above this status, which will dismiss when it loses focus. Just about everything in Unreal Engine has a little tooltip that pops up when you hover over things. Dismiss when it loses focus, well, that just means if we click somewhere, like here in the viewport, that content drawer goes away. So it pops up and goes away on its own. You can click on content drawer to bring it up and dismiss it. You can also use that little hotkey that it says, which is Control Spacebar. That's going to pop it up and bring it back down. So there are always multiple ways to do the same thing in Unreal Engine. Now, when I bring up the content drawer, I have a folder structure for my project. It starts with all, and then it goes to content. In some earlier versions of the engine, it just said content. In later versions, it may switch back to just saying content, but in this version, we see all. It doesn't matter. The content folder contains the things that you want to add to your Blueprint project. And I started my project with starter content, which if I click on it, I see to the right all the folders in starter content. If I expand the dropdown, I can see it here in my list view. And if you don't have a starter content folder, well, that means you likely forgot to check the starter content checkbox. And as I mentioned, you can always add starter content to a project if you didn't add that when creating the project. You can add it with the add button here. If you click on add, if we want to add starter content, we can go up to the top where it says add feature or content pack. And we have some options. We can even add content from the template projects if we'd like that in our blank project. But we're going to go over to content and choose starter content. Now, I didn't forget to check that checkbox, so I already have starter content. I don't need to add it to my project, but if you forgot and you want that starter content, go ahead and select add to project, and then you will have your starter content folder. And these folders contain lots of assets, well, not lots, but a few that you can add to your projects. But we're not going to dive into that just yet. What we're going to do is create a new folder in our content folder. I almost always add this folder we're about to add to my content folders in all my projects. And I can add that by right-clicking here in the gray area and selecting new folder. Or I can right-click on content here in the list view and select a new folder. And I can give that new folder a name, and we're going to call this maps. And any maps that we create for our projects will always be in maps, and that way they're easy to find. And as I mentioned, this level that we see here, this is what Epic Games has chosen to be the blank map, at least in 5.3, but we're going to make a completely new map or level. In Unreal Engine, the words map and level are interchangeable. So we're going to make a new map or level. And we can do that by going up to File and selecting New Level. Now, the first option is Open World. That's actually what we see here, at least on my version, this big terrain here. That's what you get with the open world. You can also have an empty open world, which is a really, really big level with literally nothing in it. It's completely black. You can also choose Basic or empty level, which is not as large as an open world map. It's a little bit smaller and it's completely black and empty. I'd like to choose basic. This is a nice compromise. It still has a sky, it has clouds, and it has a floor, but it's not a massive open world level. So that's what I'm going to choose. I'm going to click on create, and now we have a more basic level. It's not completely empty. It does have things in it, but it's not a massive terrain. And this is what I'd like to work in for now. So now that we're all on the same page, we've created a basic level. We need to save this level. And we can do that by going to File and Save Current Level. And now we get a pop-up and we can choose where to save it. And we're going to save it right here in Maps. And we're going to call this Basic. We can call it Basic Map, and we can click on Save, and now our basic map is in our content drawer in the Maps folder. And we can always open this level here in the content drawer by double-clicking on it. We don't need to do that now because we're already in that map. In fact, we can see that on this tab here. This shows us the icon for a map or level. In this version of the engine, it looks like this. And it says basic map. That shows us that we're in the basic map. Now, if you were to close out of the engine and open this project back up, we're not going to open the basic map. We're going to go back to that big terrain that we saw. In fact, you don't have to follow along and do this, but I'm going to close out of the engine and I'm going to open my project back up. Now, if you did close the engine, you may notice that the Epic Games Launcher is back. That's the default behavior. When you open the Unreal Engine editor, the Epic Games Launcher closes down, and when you close the editor, it launches back up. That's just the default behavior for the Epic Games Launcher. Now, I can go over to my Library tab, and I can see if my Section 1 project is here, and it is. But if it doesn't pop up for you here, you can always just open your project from your Explorer. if you pull up your Explorer, wherever you put that folder that you chose for your new project, you're now going to have a new folder inside of it with the title of your project. And you can open that, and your new Unreal Engine project is a .u project. You can always just open it up by double-clicking on that. And you saw that there were some other folders here. Don't delete those. Those are automatically created with your project. Now that I've launched my project back up, I'm back in this open world level with the big terrain. Now that may not be what you want. You may want to open to a specified map that you created. For example, I'd like this project to always open to the basic map. We can set that as a project setting for this project. We go to project settings by going up to edit and selecting project settings. And in project settings, there's a lot of options here. We're going to go to maps and modes. And under the default map section, we have the editor startup map. Notice it's set to open world. And this is just a map that's already in the engine. It's in the engine content, which is hidden. We can't see it, but because it's set here, that's where we always go when we open our new project. We're going to change that from open world to one of our maps. And notice we see a lot of maps here that we didn't know were available in our project, but we just want our basic map. We're going to select that. And with that selected, every time we open this project, it'll open up to the basic map. Now, notice there's a game default map. And that's if we actually go and package the game and ship it and launch it onto Steam or get it onto Xbox or PlayStation. Whenever our game is launched up, it'll open up to the map that we specify here. So launching the actual packaged game is different than simply opening our project in Unreal Engine's editor. So there's a difference there. Now, if you wanted to, you can set this game default map to basic map, but you don't have to because we're not launching a packaged game. We're just opening the Unreal Engine editor. So let's close project settings. And again, you don't have to follow along with what I'm doing, but I'm going to close the editor again and just launch it up again. And now look at this. We don't go to that big open world map. We go to our basic map. So that's how we set the default editor startup map always through project settings. So now that we've created our very first project, it's time to start getting used to the engine and the things that we can do in it and learning about some of these things that we see on the screen. And we'll get started with that in the next video. So great job, and I'll see you soon.